right, chapter 4, page 66, omnipresence. We have all heard about the supersonic planes crossing the Atlantic in an hour and a half. Our astronauts are crossing the Atlantic in about 15 minutes. Suppose now that a plane were developed that could shuttle back and forth between London and New York in a half a minute. Imagine yourself asking the stewardess on such a plane as to your whereabouts. She will say, "We have momentarily left New York. We are approaching London. Oops, we are on our way back to New York." Clearly, our question makes no sense. We may just have to accept the fact that we are somehow in both places more or less at once. Now, suppose that we build a vehicle that can travel almost as fast as light. This means that we could go around our planet about 7 times per second. This allows us to see practically any point on our globe within a second, and the people on the Earth may see us always at one point or another, so that we are forming a shell of presence around the Earth. Let's now visualize that we move at almost infinite speeds. Then it's easy to see that we can go around and through our solar system, or galaxy, or universe for that matter, many times a second, thus weaving a tight pattern throughout that system. We could see everything there is to see and be everywhere in practically no time at all. In other words, we would have become omnipresent. After the novelty of being omnipresent has worn off and we have become accustomed to the high speeds, we feel that it is insufficient just to whiz around so fast. We would also like to know what goes on in our solar system. For that, we have to invent a very rapid information processing computer, which we can build cheaply and quickly in our imagination. We can absorb all the information about the solar system as it comes in. We are now not only omnipresent, but omniscient. We find ourselves spread throughout and around the solar system in a shimmering, vibrating shell, all-seeing and all-knowing. After all the difficulties in attaining this great technical feat are forgotten, the attainment of almost infinite speeds becomes commonplace to us. Now we turn inside and begin to contemplate our state, and we arrive at the paradoxical conclusion that going so fast is really the same as being at rest in all places at once. We come to the conclusion that if we could only expand our consciousness, somehow our observer mind could fill all space and would not need to run so fast. Also, we now understand that attaining infinite speed would mean attaining another higher state of rest or state of being. The circle closes here. It is now time to go back to our diagrams. Let's make a diagram similar to figure 23 with the same objective coordinates. By objective coordinates, we mean that they represent space and time as we normally know them. But parallel to these objective coordinates, let's add broken lines representing our subjective coordinates in subjective space and subjective time, figure 24. In our normal waking state of consciousness, these two coordinate systems stay parallel and overlap. Most of the time, however, there is a periodic fluctuation which repeats approximately every 1.5 hours. I suggest that during altered states of consciousness, our subjective time-space coordinates separate from the objective coordinates and rotate about the common center, as shown in figure 25. Let's rotate the subjective coordinates by an arbitrary angle, which we'll call psi, and draw a line parallel to the horizontal objective space axis through the 1 second mark. This represents the projection of 1 objective second onto our subjective time. Now let us find on it the intersection with the subjective time, t subjective, by measuring the length of the diagonal line from the now to the intersection. We find that our subjective time unit is longer than the objective one. In short, it looks as if we have more time than before to do what we are engaged in doing. In fact, for the angle chosen in the diagram, we have at our disposal 4 subjective seconds to 1 objective second. Let us return to the person under the influence of a mind-affecting drug who is listening to someone speak. Suppose that the speaker utters 1 word per second. The person under the influence of the drug, and presumably in an altered state of consciousness, will have more subjective time to listen to the word and will therefore be in a better position to analyze the word because his mental processes are operating at the normal objective rate. A simple example will provide an analogy for this phenomenon. Suppose that we take a pole with knots on it. When the sun is at a low angle, the shadow of the pole becomes very long so that we can examine the knots and the spaces between them in more detail. Figure 26. The alert reader will probably remark here, why complicate things so much? Most of these phenomena can be accounted for simply by assuming that our mental processes have speeded up considerably and that therefore the sharpness of our perception has been greatly increased. We don't need subjective time and space to explain time distortions. This, however, is not quite the case, as we shall see later. Looking back at the diagram, we come to realize that any additional increase in whatever that looks like 2 plus signs angle will increase subjective time enormously. As our subjective time axis leans closer to the horizontal, we find that we may have maybe 1,000,000 subjective seconds to every objective second, because the point of intersection between the horizontal line, marking the 1 second point of objective time, will meet our tilted subjective time axis very far from the now point. And when our subjective time axis becomes finally horizontal, our subjective time becomes infinitely long, so that under these conditions we are using no objective time at all. At this point, it would be useful to sum up what we have learned from the 2 space-time diagrams. From figure 23, we know that the faster something moves, the closer it comes to the horizontal line, i.e., it exhibits a space-like behavior. From figure 25, we see that the more our subjective time axis leans to the horizontal, the more subjective time we have on our hand. If we combine these 2 diagrams, we have to conclude that a tilting of our subjective time axis causes us to behave in an increasingly space-like manner, which means that in an altered state of consciousness, we are rapidly expanding into space. In other words, an expansion of consciousness leads to an expansion into space. This may occur at speeds below or above that of light. Here, the attentive reader has probably noticed that in our subjective time, we have unceremoniously slipped through the velocity of light barrier. This is something that no physical object can do, but our observer, being a non-physical entity, will have no problem doing this. However, the observer is still tenuously linked to the physical body, and the physical senses still relay messages to him in an undistorted form. He still operates, although loosely, against the background of physical space-time. By crossing the speed of light barrier, he finds himself in a space-like universe. This is a strange new universe in which there is no limit on speed, in which time is being converted into space. Hold on. I'm going to leave it at that. We'll leave it at that.